Okay, welcome along again. It's always fantastic to see such a good crowd turn up. One day I'll have to start charging for this. It might fund my retirement, but you'll be lucky to keep it free for a little while longer at least. As usual at this time of the year, I look around and say, okay, what is the most relevant topic in the world? What's it going to be? And you might recall one year it was Greece. Everyone was worried about that. We covered that topic, and I might add as a footnote, we said Greece would be fine, and I might just remind you all that, I don't know if you saw recently, but Greece finally paid back its debt from all its trouble. So it's all looking pretty good over there. Souvlakis for everybody, no worries at all. But this year I didn't have to look very far from home. Australia itself gave me all the ammunition that I needed. So I thought it was about time we maybe have an introverted look at what's going on in Australia, because it's pretty hard to figure out. So we'll see how we go with that. I'll just let that phone pass. So there you go. So let's get started. Australia at the Crossroads. Now, as always, now we have to start off with a disclaimer. Whatever I'm going to say is my personal opinion. You shouldn't act upon it independently without your own assessment and analysis and advice. If you do anything and it doesn't work out, it's not my fault. So that's okay. And as always, we like accountability, and we start off with last year. These are the four main food groups we always cover: stock markets, currency, interest rates, property, and what we said and what happened. And with stock markets, you might recall I said that we were likely to get a correction, not a crash. I didn't think we were going to get a crash. I said we'd probably get a correction. Things were too crazy, it'd been going too strong. And you know what? We certainly did. We had a 13% correction in January, so I was spot on the money there. But we still had a phenomenal growth year, and you'll see that a little bit longer. And there's reasons for that, and we'll talk about that. But we got that absolutely on the dot. I thought the Aussie dollar had peaked at that stage, and I was confident we'd stay in the 75 to 80 cent range. And that was pretty much what happened most of the year. We actually saw it peak up at 81 cents for the dollar, but it dipped down just recently, just before. I would like it to be a couple more weeks so I could have come in here at 75 cents as I predicted, but it went all the way down to 71 recently and has now bounced up to about 72 point something. So it's a bit lower than what I predicted, but only just now. So I'm going to still take that one. I think I was pretty well right for the whole year, so I'm taking that as a tick. And then interest rates, that wasn't a hard one. The RBA to remain unchanged, banks to sneak them up a little bit, and that's exactly what happened. And of course, we've seen during the year a Royal Banking Commission in Australia, because our banks are so naughty down there, they needed to be publicly flogged. And that's what's happened. They've been put out there. They've done nothing really wrong except be very hard bankers. But I think hard bankers have been doing hard banking for thousands of years. I don't know anyone who's ever loved their bank manager unless he was giving them what they wanted. But that's just how it is. We're now bashing them up too. And with the property market, I've been predicting Sydney to cool. It absolutely did. Everyone said, no, never. And it sure did. But you shouldn't be too depressed about that, because it's had phenomenal growth. Unless you bought a property in Sydney 12 months ago, if you've been an owner for longer than that, you should be happy. Now, a little bit's come off. We'll talk about why. We thought Melbourne would still do pretty well. It did. We thought Brisbane would start coming up. It has. And we thought Perth would get going. It's about to. So we're pretty close on the mark with all those two. So I'm going to take a pretty good mark for all of that. I reckon I'm about 95 this year again, which if you could give you that good, you can come up and do next year's seminar. So hopefully we'll still be doing a bit right on this money for next year. We'll talk about our prediction shortly. So let's get straight into it. Well, Australia is at the crossroads, and it's at multi-crossroads. Not just a crossroad, but multi-crossroads. And probably the first one we're at is a political crossroad. Now, a few years ago, we set the record of having two prime ministers thrown out of their office within their first term of office by their own party. That was the Labor Party. Gillard threw out Rudd, Rudd threw out Gillard. And we thought that'll never happen. Tony Abbott said, we'll never do that. And then they did it to Abbott. And the guy that did it to Abbott's just had it done to him. We've now had 4 consecutive prime ministers that have been tossed out of their office within the first year of their election by their own people. And why have we done that? For no good reason. Allegedly, they were behind on the polls. That was the only good reason. That's what an election is for, to have a poll. And they all tossed them out and then lost the elections anyways. It doesn't make sense. But the only thing that may be a salvation for Mr. Morrison, because inevitably history repeats and number 5 is probably likely to come, is he wasn't the guy that tried to get rid of the last Prime Minister. So that we've at least broken the chain. The guy that tried to do that, he didn't get the job. But this is how the world has changed. On the Monday, he said, I want to vote. I want to get rid of the leader. I want to be the leader. And he lost. On Tuesday, he said, I didn't like the result. A day after. So on Wednesday, they had another one and he didn't get the job. Someone else got the job. So not only are we kicking Prime Ministers out, but we're not even accepting the party vote to accept the people that are there. It is an absurdity. Now, let me tell you, the most likely outcome is Morrison won't win the next election. Not because he's not worthy, he's actually quite worthy. Not because he's not capable, he's extremely capable. But he's got too short a runway to take off. The next election will be about June next year, and he's got to fix up all this, political public mess in a very short period of time and get people to believe in him. And I don't think he can do that in that period of time. But let me tell you, if Shorten gets in, he definitely has number 5 written on his back. Because his mob don't like him very much. And he has the least popular numbers of would-be prime ministers that we've pretty much ever had, and had them for the longest period of time. Almost since day one when he became opposition leader, everyone said, I don't like that bloke. But he's still there, that he can claim. But I reckon if he does get in, he'll be number 5. So let's see what happens there. So all of those 4 gone. Sad, sad. We've also had this massive community disconnect. I mean, people are sick of this mess. Now, everywhere else in the world, it's the same. They're all sick of it. They're sick of it in the UK, they're sick of it in the US, they're sick of it everywhere. But the one difference in Australia is you have to vote. In the US, they just don't turn up. That's why they have the election on a Tuesday. Who would have an election on a Tuesday? America. Apparently you don't have to go to work that day. But everyone else does it on the weekend. But you don't have to turn up. They're hoping you don't. Because if you don't turn up, someone like Donald will get elected. That's what happens. But in Australia, if you don't vote, you get fined. So this is going to be a real paradox. We've now got a situation where no one will want to vote, but they'll have to vote because they'll get fined. We could have a record donkey vote in Australia, where you go in and deliberately just draw on the ballot paper. We'll see what happens there. It's going to be interesting. And one of the things that I'm really unhappy with the politicals is particularly the Labor Party, the opposition, is trying to create this rich versus poor world. The rich should pay, the poor need it. The thing is, in Australia, we don't really have poor people. We only think we do. If you want to know what poor people are like, let's go visit some of the countries in the rest of the world. America. If you want to see poor, go to America. Africa, even UK. We don't have poor in Australia because we have the highest level of social care, social support in the world. But we have this ideological generosity which is out of control. They want to make sure everybody is prospering. And that's fine. But we've gone too far now. We're not just helping people out. You've got free education, free health, free this, free that. Money if you need it. Wages if you're not working. You get everything. But we want to give more and more. And apparently the rich want to keep paying for it or should pay for it. But the problem is we keep spending on this ideological generosity and no one's checking if it's making any difference. Our education is at record expenditure levels, but the standard of our schooling is dropping on a world scale. Our health has never had more money spent on it, but people reckon they can't get in to see a doctor. So we're not really getting bang for our buck, and the money just disappears and the flow is unending. And there seems to be very little importance on substance. It doesn't matter what you're trying to achieve, it's what you blurb. Facts are irrelevant. And this is a global trend, but it's very, very disturbing. And of course, the media is control. Unless you're the head of ABC, and now you're not in control anymore. And if you're the chairman who got rid of the head, you're dead too. But the media is not a commentator anymore. It's a catalyst. It's driving the conversation. It's being the topic. And that's wrong. And again, this is a global phenomena. I don't know how we reverse it. You know, we've gone from saying this is what's going on to the media telling us this is what should go on. That can't be right. That can't be right. And of course, look at the quality of our leaders globally, not just in Australia. Australia, we still have, I think, high competence in our leadership potential and current. You know, Malcolm Turnbull was a great guy. Kevin Rudd had abilities. Julia told us how wonderful she was. Yeah, but they had experience, they had education, they had lots of things. And then there's the others. Let's not mention those. But our standards are going to keep dropping if we keep knifing them in the back. Who would want to be Australian Prime Minister if you've got to look over at your own people stabbing you in the back? Not the opposition, that's normal. But your own people. And I'm really worried about my personal future because I'm so politically incorrect it's not funny. And Australia is getting way too politically correct. You know, I mean, I can't even tell you how politically correct because I would just fall on the floor and start laughing, to be honest. But we can't do anything. We can't sing Christmas carols. We can't, all this sort of stuff. It's just madness. So we need to fix that. I mean, if you can't say what you think and not have to worry about if it offends someone remotely, then how are we ever going to have expression? I don't know how that goes, but I'm going to have to be muzzled sometime in the very near future, I can tell you that much. We're also at economic crossroads. You know, everyone tells us, oh, Australia is going to collapse, the property market's going to collapse, the economy is no good, it's relying on China. But what they don't understand is that that's all old news. This commodity dependence that everyone preaches on is an absolute fallacy. In fact, if you look at the facts, mining investment as a contribution to GDP is a negative contributor to growth and has been for some time. It's not boosting the economy, it's actually lagging it. Now, every now and again it has a surge, as you'll see here. You can see the mining investment boomed there 2 times. But that's investment, capital outlay. It's short term, it's temporary, it's never long. But what is happening is the output in blue. The output is ever increasing because when you invest and build a new mine, guess what? You sell more stuff. More iron ore, more gold, more lithium. But as always, Australia's problem has been we don't do any processing. We've got no downline. At least with lithium, they are talking about maybe having a little bit of downline processing. We've talked about smelting in Australia, never happened. We talked about value adding to everything, never happens. We like just sending out the mess and bring it back shiny, please. But we've got so many pillars of our economy. Agriculture, mining, education, tourism, property. But our key one is domestic consumption. The business of just living, having breakfast, getting on a bus, going to work, getting that new shirt, sending your kids to school, going on a holiday. People underestimate how much that's worth. Look at consumption. It's the biggest single contributor to GDP growth in Australia. And that's similar all around the world. And even in the GFC, one of the things I reminded people during that first ever seminar when we talked about how bad the world would be was don't ever underestimate the value of activity. Look at Singapore. How many mines do you have in Singapore? None. But this economy has boomed because there's lots of Singaporeans eating chicken rice every day. And it keeps everybody busy. It's just activity that makes things grow. We don't need all these big things they tell us about. Just being human, we're greedy, consuming animals. That's enough. And that's happening in Australia now. We hit critical mass. But you can see it's diverse. It's coming from a number of places. And you can see here, there's mining. Again, you look at the dependence on mining. Job growth from mining has been negative. And not just in the last year, the last 2 years, basically for the last 5, 6 years. The biggest single booster of jobs, household services. No one even washes their dog anymore. There's a dude that drives around the streets with a trailer on the back and charges you $40 to wash your dog. How lazy are we? Where are our children when the dog needs washing? What happened to us? There's nothing that doesn't get done by somebody else anymore. I know people that can't honestly change light bulbs. They ring. Our tenants at the property division, they literally ring up and say, the light bulb doesn't work. Can you get someone to come and change it? Are you serious? But this is the way the world's gone. We need to be pampered and looked after now. But you can see in all areas, jobs are being created. And you can see in terms of, output, business services, everything is happening. We've got it all going on in Australia. We don't care about the mines. That's just cream. Thick, sweetened whipping cream. That's all it is. It helps a lot, but it's not the guts of it all. Oh, that's not too good. That graph didn't work at all. This one is the graph for the foreign investment in Australia now, which has plummeted. So you at least can see the line, but you can see last year China bought 30,000 properties in Australia, but we've been slugging foreign buyers now. We've introduced foreign buyers levies, 7% coming in WA, 7% currently in Victoria, 8% in New South Wales, 7% in Queensland. And you might recall I predicted it would see a fall, and it has. It's gone from $70 billion of activity down to $22 billion. It's the biggest risk to our economy going forward because that's a huge takeout of not just housing investment, but job creation. Our construction industry is massive. And it's just fool's paradise. Unfortunately, what's happened is they've got greedy, but this is what greed does to you. You think you're going to make lots of money out of the opportunity, and you make less. You can see here, before all of these fees came in, right up until 2015, our foreign investment was escalating from $6 billion to $60 billion in 2015. And so the state government said, oh, look at all that money. We're already making lots from stamp duty, lots from this, lots from that. Let's make more and charge these fees. In 2016, they brought in the foreign buyers fees. It was only $800 million only across Australia. It got whacked up and they thought, oh, we'll double it, triple it. It went from 3 to 7. And yeah, it went up to $2 billion from $800 million. That went up a lot. But what they lost was the GST that they get from the activity. It's 70 billion sales. There's 6 billion roughly of GST in that sale price. Goes to the States. There was $2.6 billion of stamp duty in those sales on top of that go to the States. So they were collecting $9 billion of extra revenue. And by trying to get more, look at that, the revenue dropped to 2.8. Genius. This is the Australian business skill. Cook that goose. Shoot it, cook it, eat it, and then wonder where the next one is. We're going to have to buy that business back. So you can see they went from 14 billion of revenue to 5. Now, some of that was because China introduced some money tightening. Some of it was because, it's harder to get a loan. But a smart person would have said, hey, let's make sure these guys get a loan. That should be government policy. Let's continue that activity. No, not in Australia. They said, let's do it less. The banks, Australian banks, have been building businesses in Asia for 30 years. They all last year said, let's close our operations down. There's finally $70 billion worth of opportunity. We don't need to hang around for that. Let's leave. They were here when it was $6 billion of opportunity. That's genius. Genius. That should have been the Royal Commission. How come you're so stupid? But that's not what we had the Royal Commission for. But you can see this is the Australian psyche. Charge more, because on paper we'll make it. But the problem is you charge more, you collect less. How many of you would turn up? Let's have a show of hands if I charged $100 to come to this session. I could be rich. I'm looking around at all the money in front of me. But none of you would be here. The coffee would be stale in no time. I'd be so fat from the spring rolls. No one would be turning up. And this is the problem in Australia. They think, great, let's do that. Stop. Appreciate the activity. Rejoice in the $14 billion. That's $10 billion more than 2 years prior. How could you not just be happy with that? Doesn't make sense, does it? But that's the Australian way. And this is what they want to do even more at federal level if Shorten gets in. Tax more because it'll be great. And he doesn't understand. Tax more, collect less. Johnny Howard figured that out, and that's how he paid off the debt. You know, the Liberal Party have been good with the budget lately because they've taxed less and they've collected more and the budget's in better shape. It's not rocket science, but they don't seem to figure it out. We're also at a cultural crossroad. There is nowhere more accepting, tolerant, loving, endearing than Australia. Because no one cares what you do. It's up to you. She'll be right, mate. So we've got diversity, equality. We've had gay marriage. You know, we don't even understand what real racism is. You know, we've got tolerance like nothing on earth. There's nowhere nicer to be. You know, we only don't like you if you don't mingle, if you don't come to the footy, if you don't watch the cricket. You know, then we say, what's wrong with you? What sort of person are you? But once you get down there and you can say a few things, then you'll be fine. But we've got a strange sense of belonging. Australians love their country, extremely proud, but we just don't quite know what it means anymore. So it's evolving all the time. But we've got loads of people like me and the other Aussies in the room that are spreading around. There's 1 million plus Aussies all over the world, but we all make sure we keep our accents. There's only a few that go to England and change their accent to Pommy, you know, but that changes quickly. But we're out there spreading our wings, creating opportunity, hopefully building our financial futures to head back to Australia. Less than 5% that leave never come back. That's about the highest in the world. My ancestry is Scotland. None of those have ever gone back. I visited the place once and it was getting close to winter and I said, no. This is a nice place. I've got my bottle of scotch. I'm heading back. It's just wonderful. The Singaporeans that go down, there are not too many that come back, except for a quick feed every now and again. But all Aussies end up going back. And we're engaged in the country. We like to shape it. It's wonderful. And everyone accepts everybody else. You can be whatever you want. You can have your hair whatever colour you feel like. You can wear whatever horrible clothes you choose. That's okay. We don't even look at that as weird anymore. It's just normal. I don't know how people get some of those piercings in the places that they put them anymore. I can't do it, but it's okay for them. But I do wonder if we've gone too far and what legacy are we leaving, because you can't have too much freedom. Lee Kuan Yew understood that, didn't he? You know, we've still got to make sure people work. And this is the issue. The more freedom, the more independence, the more individuality we create, the harder it is to get uniformity and output and direction, because we're now pulling in so many different directions. Everybody says, oh, I'm this category now and I need special attention. In the old days, everybody was equally miserable where I went to. You just had to suck it up and keep moving. Now everybody wants to say, no, I'm more miserable than they are. I need extra special attention. And then someone goes, no, I'm far more miserable than you. We've just got to say, cheer up, get on with it. It's not that bad. I still believe we should be making people on the dole go work in Africa in some godforsaken place where people have got real problems. 6 months there, they'll never complain again. They'll be straight down McDonald's for a job, I can tell you. A property is also at the crossroads. Everyone says, oh, it's all going to end. It's no good. It's too high. We're going to be just like the rest of the world. Maybe. But there's a huge lack of understanding in what is the Australian property market. Part of that is because it's so new. It really is only 10, 15 years old. That's how old it really is. Now, again, I'd go around the world and look at some of the amazing properties in places around the world, and I see culturally how things have changed and how lazy generations can become. You know, it defies logic to me when I go to a place like Rome, Athens, Prague, London, and you see the incredible craftsmanship of architecture, even in Singapore. You look at some of the beautiful old buildings, the amount of effort that it took to do those. We can't get craftsmen to do that anymore. They reckon it's too costly. It's just because we're too lazy. It's far easier to bolt something than to chip it, you know. But our property market is very different because it's so new. We have what I call a real need underdevelopment. Where we need property, we don't have enough of it. We're family-driven migration, but we don't have enough new family homes. So we've got this huge supply and demand mismatch. Got too much of the stuff we don't need, not enough of the stuff we do need, and that creates a little bit of confusion in the market. We're also just coming to terms with city centralisation. Now, Sydney, being the biggest city, has evolved quicker than the others because it started so much earlier. Its population was so much bigger, so living in the city is cool. Melbourne has embraced that in the last 20 years and taken it to a whole nother level. Perth, no one goes to the city. Brisbane, it's only just figuring out that it exists. But, you know, it's eventual got to happen. You've got to have that centralisation because we're not spending money on infrastructure and stuff. But what we don't have is a bottom end. People forget we don't have slums in Australia. We've got neighbourhoods that you're not going to be desperate to buy in, I can tell you that much. But let me tell you, that worst property in Australia is probably better than 70% of the stuff I've seen in the rest of the world. And if that's our low mark, God, that's not a bad place to be. And that's always why Australian statistically never looks good when you compare against global prices, because we don't have junk for 50,000 that is a no drive-through zone. Our worst property in Sydney would be, what, $400,000? And would be a nice 2 or 3 bedroom townhouse in a suburb that you wouldn't be desirable for, but is okay. Population growth is the driver, and the cycles are things that happen. And I've always reminded people that population is what makes the cycle turn around. If we don't have population growth, we can't fix cycles because you're inevitably going to build more sometimes, you know, and have too much. And if you don't have population arrive, you have stagnant oversupply. It's population that fixes cycles, it's cycles that fix the prices. But, you know, people don't seem to understand that. They still think, even with Sydney having such a good run, that you can't lose. The only way is up. No, can't happen like that. You have to have high, medium, low. High, medium, low. That's what life's all about. And property is shifting in the way we need to think about it. There's a huge complacency at all levels, including government, because there's a massive infrastructure lag. Governments love to collect money. They hate to spend it in Australia. So if you say, hey, we need a highway, oh, we need to form a committee for that, we need to assess that, we need to get tenders, we have to have an environmental impact, we have to then put it out for public opinion, we then need to send it out for 17 tenders, then we need to see if it's really necessary. 17 years pass and they go, oh, 1 million people are living out there, maybe we should have put a highway there. There is a massive lag between delivery and requirement. You know, look at dams. They don't build enough of them in Australia. And they're wondering why we might have water shortages. Our population's just hit 25 million and we haven't built a dam for 20 years. We must have had a lot of spare glasses of water from before. I hope they recycle that stuff. But that's a big issue there. You know, there's also not that much good stuff. There's a lot. But you know what? There's more people now than good stuff. 10, 15, 20 years ago, there was more good stuff than people. Now there's more people than good stuff. That's the same in Singapore. It's the same in the rest of the world. When you've got more people than good stuff, then you have to fight for the good stuff. And Australia's really hitting that straps. And that literally is what happened to Sydney in this last boom. It was the first time we've seen real money creation in the property market in Australia. First time ever. You know, in past cycles, even in Sydney as our dominant market, people made a couple of $100,000, which Australians thought was huge. My word, I've just made a couple of $100,000. Whoa. But as Singaporeans will tell you, that's nothing. They made 2-3 million in their big surge. They bought Ferraris, put their kids through world schools. Couldn't afford that in Australia with that surge, but this surge in Sydney has seen people make millions of dollars for the first time in the history of the Australian property market. And that's because that premium competition is high and there are people with the money to pay for it. That's the big difference. And that is a real and rising influence. It is not speculative. It is not false. It is not hopeful. It is not wishful. It is not interest rates. It is checkbook reality from human beings that want and can afford. And when you get that, you can't stop it. That's why Singaporeans' property market is so strong. That's why US property markets in New York are so strong. That's why UK in the desired areas are so strong. Because once you have the want with the cash, you are unstoppable. And that's what's happened in Australia in this run in Sydney. There's also a massive change in thought. In the old days, I bought my first property in the middle of nowhere because that's all I could afford. And I hoped to sell it in a few years and move a bit closer, and then hoped to sell it a few years and make a few bucks and move a bit closer. And maybe by the time I was 175, I was somewhere where I wanted to live. But not these days. They're not going to wait 5 minutes. You know? They say, no, why would I want to live out there? I like this. I want to live right here. This is cool, this place. But you can't afford this. I don't care. I'm going to do it because they're willing to rent. Now, how many times have you asked yourself, oh, what a waste of money, why are you renting? Don't understand why they're doing that. People in Sydney, look at the rents they're paying now. $500 to rent a room in Sydney. Oh, why would you do that? You should buy. Because buying means effort. It means saving. It means deposit. It means all sorts of things. Sacrifice. I can't go on holiday if I have to pay a mortgage repayment. That ain't going to happen. Now again, in our day, we would have said, that's madness. You must own. Otherwise, what will happen to you? You'll have nothing. And they go, don't worry, the old folks are going to die soon. They don't have any fear looking forward as to an emptiness like we did. We had to own because there was nothing coming our way. I carried this pen as a very important reminder in my life because this is the sum token of my father's inheritance to me. I'm not joking. I'm seriously not joking. And the worst part about it, it's got Chevron written on it. And it was given to him. He didn't even buy it. But it happens to be my favourite make, so I'm keeping it. But that's what our reality was. So I had to go out and work hard, so I had something to look forward to. These kids say, look, I might as well rent because I'll get the house anyway. Mum and Dad own just around the corner. I'll get that later. Job done. And you know what? They're probably right. So they're a bit smarter than us. But they're starting to pick up that wealth earlier. And again, it's the first time in Australia's history we're seeing wealth transfer down. I got a pen, but I'm getting clients come in now and saying, oh, look, my mum just died. She had $1 million because she had a half-ugly house in Sydney, now worth $800-900 million. She had a couple of dollars here and a couple of dollars there. All of a sudden, it's $1 million and I was an only child. Woohoo. And that's on top of what we did, thinking we'd never get anything. So it's a big difference. And again, remember what I said earlier. If you have want with cash, you have stimulus. At the moment we have want, but the parents have the cash. But when the parents are gone, we get the cash. And that's dangerous. Because then I've got want with cash that I didn't even earn. And let me tell you, have you seen someone go to the casino with someone else's money? Double up. Let's go. And that's going to be an interesting thing. And then we've got this new age migration. Again, when I started this many, many years ago, if someone had told me that someone would buy a house on the waterfront in Sydney for $20 million so their child could stay in it while they studied, I would have called you a lunatic. Never happened. Let me tell you, it does. You know, things have gone crazy. And the new age migration, these people are extremely wealthy. They're coming to Australia because $5, $6, $7 million doesn't sound like much in Singapore, but it's still a fortune in Australia. $10, $20, $30 million gets you nothing in Hong Kong, but it puts you right at the top end in Sydney. And why wouldn't you come down? And they are buying because they can, they will, and they will come in greater numbers, because I don't know if you've checked, we've got 25 million people in Australia now, but the world has 6 billion. So watch out when the rest turn up. And we are the new old world. If you look all around the world and say, who are the richest people and what do they have? The one thing that keeps coming up as a dominator, property. They own this, they own that, they own a shopping centre, they own a building, they own a heap of houses. Australia, we've just lived in them for a long time. But wealth is now becoming to us through property in a big, big way. And we will be the next generation. And if you want to have a really nice place in Paris, it costs a fortune. A really nice place in London, it costs a fortune. At the moment, it doesn't cost a fortune in Australia, it just costs a lot. But it will cost a fortune. And just to give you a quick idea, here's a snapshot. I just grabbed these 3 off the internet today. I'm not selling them, but I can arrange it if you want it. New York, 1,700 square foot, 3-bedroom apartment, $3 million US. And that's only Midtown. I didn't get anything flash. I didn't think you'd believe me if I put the $8 million one up. 3 million US, 4 million Aussie. Nice one in London. It is waterfront, £2.5 million, 1,400 square feet, 4.6 Aussie. Singapore, Marina Bay, you all know that. It's the big place, 1,100 square feet. Just as well Asians aren't 7 foot tall and wide as me, hey? But that's 3.2 million, and that's a low level, but it has a nice view. 3.2 million, and it's now 1-for-1, people. And then Sydney, you can still get that beautiful view of Darling Harbour, 1,400 square feet, 2.6. So the thing is, you look at comparable, expensive to us 2.6, cheap to the rest of the world. And that's what's going to happen. If you want that lifestyle, Australia still offers it the best value out of everywhere. So Australia is at the crossroads. It's at a lot of weird places. It's evolving nicely. It's changing in ways that I didn't realise. But I think we're heading roughly in the right direction. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Let's get stuck into some of the things that matter in the world right now, like stock markets. Now, what an interesting year. We've moved from one-way traffic, which was what last year was all about. Only way was up, but we've now moved, believe it or not, into two-way traffic. And that's what we predicted last year. We said there'd be a correction. We said high volatility. I'll show you very soon that that was definitely the case. But it doesn't make sense where we're at. Again, if you arrived on the planet today, you had not read a newspaper for the last 5, 10, 15 years, and you opened up and said, what's going on? And they said, there's trade sanctions, there's government debt and spending, and there's lots of political confusion in the world. Would you expect the stock market to be at a record high? The answer is no, but it is. How can that be? Because we let it be, and you'll see what happens with that later. How long can it go for? Well, it'll go for as long as we let it go. That's up to us. And I'll show you a new thing in a little while that will blow your mind, what I call the Bitcoin generation. But it'll go as long as we let it. And let's face it, none of us know that we're actually letting it happen. We don't think it's all nothing to do with us, but it's everything to do with us, because it's our super funds, our investment funds, that is driving this market. Not us, but we're the indirect fuel for this fire. And this US tax cut, which you know that I hate. If you've come to the seminars before, you know I think it was a terrible idea. You know that I think it was bad. And I did predict, if you recall, that it would see a huge amount of mega mergers. Has that happened? My word, it has. A couple of the huge mergers have gone on in the US already, and it's the first of a few. It's going to be an absolute swamp. And I'll show you how much impact it has. These are the two things that I look for in my barometers: forward PEs and dividend yields. And you can see if PEs get too high, you might recall that means danger. So you can see it was heading towards 20 last year. And that's why I said, look, we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. A correction is imminent. But you can see, no worries, no worries. It corrected. It came down nice and sharply. Why did it do that? Because of the tax cuts. What happened was, in this period here, profitability after tax got recalibrated. Because tax went from, 30 down to 21. That meant profitability went up, which meant PEs became normal again. So we've bought time through the tax cuts. It was half the con. It's a terrible thing. But it means that theoretically we're in safe territory if you believe those tax cuts are there long-term forever, which, let's face it, is going to be very hard for them to get them back. If you look at, the dividend yields, the red line is the danger line. And you can see we were heading towards that very much. And that was, again, my warning. The fundamentals are not good. The fundamentals aren't good. When fundamentals aren't good, correction is there. You can see it corrected. It went back up. Why? Because the capacity to pay dividends has also increased if I've got more after-tax income. So I've bought time in an artificial sense, but at what cost? At what cost do those tax cuts come? When you consider how large the US deficit is and how large the US debt is, that's a significant social cost that America will have to pay for not decades, but centuries. Centuries. It is impossible to clear their debt if they don't increase revenue. And that is a massive revenue giveaway. But they say it's worth it. And if we have a look, here is the All Ordinaries since a year ago. And when I said we'd see a correction, I said I didn't think a crash was coming. I said I thought we'd see some movement. But look what we did get. We got 18.1% growth on the Dow. 18% growth, largely fueled by those tax cuts. Sentiment is strong. The All Ordinaries, you might recall I said it had an underachieving year last year. It'll have a good year. It did, 8.7. And the FTSE, flat as a tack. Right? But let's have a look. There's the peak, 2646. A 12% correction occurred. And let's face it, did any of you know that? No. We've all tuned out. Now that 12%, that's someone taking the money and putting it out of someone else's pocket into theirs, because that's what the stock market is. It's a wealth transfer device. Someone made a lot of money, it wasn't us. But they took 12% out and did 18. So what that usually will mean is if you check your funds in US denominated Dow investments, you probably made 6. Because they pushed it up 12, took back 12, gave it to themselves, and then gave you 6, being the difference. That's what they do. Legally, but not ethically. Legally, but not morally. Legally, because they have your consent to do it. But theoretically, if you had sold and then corrected, you'd have been up 30% on the year. Now again, I'm only an accountant. I don't know anything about shares. These professionals, they should have seen that coming. If only they'd watched my seminar, they would have known. But they could have made 30% for you looking after your money. How many of you did 30%? Because theoretically, these experts would have seen, oh, this is a high point, this is a peak, let's sell and cash and then buy back soon. No, that doesn't happen. Not for us. Not for us. But for someone. But that's how it goes. But you can see this is the world we live in. There's no reason, as I said, factually, logically, this should not be happening right now. But it is. If you look at that, there's our correction there in the red, up in the top. But the thing is, if you look at, again, history, we're back towards these peak markets of past. And you see these corrections are always there a bit. It's just, are we at the second last one or the last one? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Oh, it's so hard to know. But to me, I think with this mood, we've still got so much to go, potentially. If we have a look at the graph I always put up, here's just the ones I put up year to year, 9th of September. BHP 3.9, HSBC down 10.5, Bank of America up 35, CBA down 3.7 thanks to the Royal Commission. 46% growth on Microsoft. Woohoo! Who had those? Bill Gates, that's who. Pfizer up 23%, Coke only 1. But look how much the profit is. It's huge, 11 billion, 18 billion, and that's after tax. It's massive. And there you go, Dow Jones 18.9, more than I expected. I think I suggested 5 to 10, I think was my mark, maybe even sub 5. So that's way more than I expected. And that was with a 12% correction. 18.9 including a 12% correction. Goodness me. And none of us knew. Don't you love that? All Ordinaries did nice at 9, FTSE flat at 1.4. But here's the mind-blowing bit. Have a look at these companies. So here's BHP. It turns over 44. It makes 8 billion after profit. It paid 7 billion. So it actually made 15 billion, paid 7 billion in tax. It's got 16 billion in the bank. Cash and short-term investments. Net tangible assets, real assets, it's got 55 billion, but its market cap's 122. Now that's not too bad. That's 2 times. Now, hard to know whether it should be 2 times, 3 times. They've got a lot of good mines. They've got potential to find stuff, so that's not a bad ratio. But 15 billion in the bank. I want to run a company like that. But that's not very good, because look at HSBC. It's got 144 billion. Bank of America, 175. CBA, $64 billion. Microsoft has $40 billion in the bank. Again, I'm not a very good accountant because I still go to that old school that I was told that if you were a company and you have too much cash, give it back to your shareholders because you're not putting it to work. We were educated that that was a bad thing because it lowered our return of investment and would make us look bad. But they're holding that cash. Microsoft, 133 million, I should say, in the bank. Coke has 20 billion in the bank. But look, Coke's only got $400 million worth of assets, net tangible assets. The rest is brand. And the brand is 200 billion. Now, I've got to tell you, everybody knows what Coke is. So 200 billion is probably not a bad price for that. But everyone also knows how bad it is for you. So is it a positive value brand or is it a negative value? Who knows? But one of the things that scares me, if you look at Microsoft, 133 billion, 39 net tangible assets, 800 billion market cap. But its share price went up 46%. So it was worth about 500 billion 12 months prior, and for nothing really happening, went up $300 billion in a year. What's that about? This thing, no one's checking these things. I mean, how do you go up 10, 20% when you're already at an amazing number? Amazing number. But we're letting it happen. We're giving them our money and saying, as long as you don't lose it, it's okay, don't tell me. And that's where we're at in the world. And this is why I call it the Bitcoin generation. This is the clearest way that I can describe to you about how we think as a world. Let me tell you one thing that is indisputable. Bitcoin is worthless. That's a fact. If you want to argue with me on that, I'll happily take it on. If you can show me one asset that backs Bitcoin, that I will concede, even if it's just a single dollar sitting in a drawer somewhere, it is worthless. It has nothing except sentiment. My belief that you will buy it off me tomorrow. That's all that Bitcoin has. Now, dollars, currency is the same. It's my belief that the government will give it to me. But let me tell you, if I go to the government and they don't, I can go repossess a port. I can go take over a post office. I'll go take over some of their public facilities because they have assets. It's not easy to get them, but there's something behind it. Tax revenue. But there is nothing behind Bitcoin except sentiment. And this is what the world is. We're overflooded with sentiment. Now, even before Bitcoin was popular, that nothing was worth $15 billion. I don't know about you, but would anyone like to buy some of my nothing for $15 billion? I'm selling it. I've got a couple of them. But somehow we said that nothing was so valuable that it should be worth really $238 billion. What they're trading is sentiment. My belief that some sucker will pay me more than I paid for it. That there's a bigger sucker somewhere out there. Could be you. But let me tell you for fact, it is worthless. But even now we've recognized that it's worthless, it's still valuing nothing at $115 billion. Isn't that amazing? We've seen it crash from 20,000 to 6,000. It's only sentiment. And this thing, we can apparently put sentiment in a jar and price it. We've been able to grasp the technology. Because that's what blockchain is. It's my ability to grasp sentiment in a jar and flog it to you. But the Bitcoin itself is worthless. $114 billion of worthless. The point here is not don't buy Bitcoin. That's up to you if you want to trade sentiment. But that's just the reality of how we think today. That nothing, absolute nothing, is worth on a bad day $100 billion. So let's face it, $800 billion for Microsoft, that is something. That's a bargain. That's a serious bargain, you've got to admit. If nothing's worth $100 billion, then God, I hope I get some of that nothing. I hope you buy some of that nothing from me one day. This is the world, people. This is where we're at. And this is why we can't stop nothing happening. All that happened from Bitcoin, you know what happened here? Some idiot put it on the news. On the news tonight, we're in the finance and BHP went up. It had a new mine open up and Bitcoin went from $900 to $1,200 today, up 30%. Oh, it's on the news. I better go buy some nothing because nothing's making people rich. Let's go get some more nothing. And that news took it from 900 to 19. If we go back here, do you remember how much Bitcoin started at? 20 cents. That was almost nothing. But I love nothing for 100 billion. That's a great thing. But that's it. So my predictions for the stock market, because this is where we end this part, is that nothing will keep growing into something. The stock market has another year to go because Trump is still there for another 2. And he won't stop anything. And sentiment is still strong. The fundamentals are weak. I'm scared about the stock market, I must say to you, because it's overvalued. I'm genuinely scared. But whilst this sentiment exists at this pace, I can't tell you that it's going to be doom and gloom because the logic doesn't override the reality of the illusion. But I'm telling you, fundamentally, the stock market should correct. And it will correct sometime soon when all of a sudden we wake up and say, oh, it actually was nothing. But the numbers they're putting on things, Google is now worth $1.6 trillion. Apple is $1 trillion. I don't know about you, but if I had $1 trillion, I would not buy Apple. But you can. Currency markets. Well, do we see a correction or an adjustment? I'm going to call it an adjustment. Again, nothing became worth something. The US dollar is strong. Again, 21 trillion debt, 1 trillion annual deficit, yet that's a good currency. I remember in my dark days financially going into my bank manager and saying, mate, I'm not making a profit and I need you to lend me more money, but don't worry, my business is great. He chucked me out the door. How rude. But that's what happens. We're saying, no worries, would you like enough? How do we fund $1 trillion deficit? You correct the stock market 12%. You shift wealth from A to B and you give it to the government to keep the nothing alive. That's how you do it. You think that's crazy? Go check the behind the scenes. It's happening. But that's what's crazy. How do you have $1 trillion debt and lower taxes at the same time for companies massively? Doesn't make sense. But the US dollar is still allegedly seen as a safe haven because even with Donald in charge, they know that he can't stay there any longer than 2 terms, 8 years. 2 have already gone. So they know whoever comes after him, whatever mess he creates, they'll still have to honour the debt. So one day that might turn that mess into a miracle. But I don't know, I think they've gone too far into mess and too big a miracle required. Let's see what happens. And we're in the middle of trade wars for no reason. I suppose it's better than having real wars. Thank God Donald was able to sort out North Korea. That was amazing. You know, stop a war that was never going to happen with a threat that never existed, with a man that never cared, by a person that never really gave a damn. That was a fantastic form of political experience. Loved it. But let's have trade wars. That shouldn't be strengthening the dollar, should it? Given that the Americans are consumers and need the goods coming in. But we'll see what happens. And we have cleared that conflict, but I'm not sure if that was the driver. But we have seen the Aussie dip. And again, we've said 75 to 80 cents. It's stayed in that band most of the time. It's snuck under, and it's now snuck under recently, down to 71, but it's rebounded back to the 72. I'm going out on a limb here. Risk prediction. I'm going to go back to 75 to 80. I'm going to stay stuck in the mud. Doesn't matter anyways. But I don't believe the US dollar is worth that. And I think the Australian economy, which has now not been in recession for a record 26, 27 years, is still strong, is still viable. And I don't think it deserves to be losing ground. But I'm going to go asterisk, I could be wrong. Okay? But I'm going to stay at 75 to 80 cents. Against the Sing, it's dollar. In fact, it's better than dollar. How wonderful. How wonderful. What a great time to send money down, buy assets, invest in our projects, do all sorts of things. It's like the old days. I remember it was down at 90 cents once. Probably shouldn't have got that low, but it did. Took a whole crisis to do that, but it didn't take a crisis to get to parity again. How's the Singapore economy? It must be booming, is it? No. That's what I'm saying. Reality, emotional, I don't know. I'm not comfortable at a dollar, probably because my belt gets to get tightened so much. So I'm praying for $1.05, but you're all praying for $1.95, so that's okay. We'll settle for $1. How about that? But again, don't forget, it's on the drag of the US as opposed to the strength of the Sing. And that is an issue, so just bear that in mind. So my prediction, I'm going to stay at $1.75 to 80. Interest rates, got that one right, but you can see there's at least some logic here as to why the US dollar has strengthened. They have raised their interest rate from what was 0 to now just under 2%. So their official rate has gone up. And again, the only thing that makes sense in the world right now is in the economics book. If you put up your interest rate, official rate as a government, it should strengthen your currency. That is in the official economics book that any student would take if they do any studies in financial of anything. So that makes sense. But when you look at the scale and say, but look at the debt and the deficit, that should overweigh that. But that at least gives us rationale to the dollar improving. And of course, Australia has flatlined. We haven't put rates up now for over 2 years. They have not moved. The last movement was down, as you can see. So it is now 8 years since we've seen a rate increase in Australia on official rates. It's almost about 30 days since we've seen a rate increase on unofficial from the bank. They're now saying it's too expensive, amazingly. But that should not change. The RBA will probably not put rates up in the next 12 months unless they get worried about the dollar. That would be, to me, their only motivation to put it up. But let's face it, Australia's not going to cry with a low dollar. That mining industry, do you think they're devastated that the dollar is now weak when they're selling commodities at US dollar prices? Don't think so. So don't expect anyone to worry about it. Now you can see in financing, it's still very difficult to get a loan, but for investors, you can see owner-occupiers are still very active. And again, that also underlines the strength of the overall housing industry. The market's strong because there's still activity. It's investors that have tapered off, but investors haven't tapered off because of sentiment. They've tapered off because of bank policy not giving them the loans. For every 10 clients that come and see us now for a loan, we're lucky if we can give 2 out. In the old days, for every 10 clients that used to come and see us, we gave out 12. Because you didn't walk out with just 1 property, you got 2. Now, good luck getting the loan. You could have all the equity in the world, but you can buy a shack at Broken Hill. It doesn't make sense. So until that changes and investors are re-engaged by the banks, this property market is going to naturally stay soft, and interest rates will also stay soft with it. But the banks will take the opportunity to be profiteering, which they are, and the government is a willing participant in that. That's why they introduced a bank levy of 0.25%. Give us that, and you can do what you want. Simple as that. So my prediction on interest rates is they're going to stay officially flat. Again, still very good for fixed rates in particular, still very hard to get a loan. We're still desperately trying to bring on our lending fund. It's not too far. You know, we're almost the final few hurdles. I'll announce that when it happens. It's taken longer than I hoped. So interest rates will remain unchanged. Enjoy that. Take advantage. Keep it cheap. Again, the population is still the most important thing with our property market, and you can see it's now getting stronger and stronger. 388 last year. You know, Sydney and Melbourne leading the way, 143,000 new people in Melbourne. Now that's almost as many as that get in the MCG last Saturday to watch the amazing Eagles win the grand final. That was 100,000 people. But those people hung around. Everyone went home from the MCG. These people moved there and stayed. And that's economic activity. 140,000 new bodies. Half are babies. So that's a lot of nappies, as I've always remind people. It's a lot of new beds. It's a lot of new cars. It's a lot of new sofas. It's a lot of new washing machines. It's a lot of economic activity. And that's why immigration is so important to Australia. It's what's driven the property markets in Sydney and Melbourne, because demand has got red hot from that high population, and supply took a while to catch up. But we're now in an unusual crossroad, even on migration in Australia. You're now starting to hear everybody go, we should slow migration. And that is dangerous. It's dangerous because that's what's fueling our economy more than any other thing. It's what's making our services efficient. It's what's expanding jobs, because household services is the biggest single creator of employment in Australia, and there's more households. We need more households. So we need this. And you know the thing that really irks me the most about people that talk about migration policy? They're all bloody migrants. You don't have a right to talk about migration policy if you're a migrant, in my view. But that is politically incorrect, I must say. The only people that have a right to talk about migration policy are the Aboriginals, the Native Americans in the USA. Let's go get their view about the wall. The irony is they're building a wall in Mexico to stop them getting into their land. Mexico was California and Texas. We can't remind them of that, though. That would be unfair and unjust. But migration is essential everywhere in the world. Otherwise, we'd have nothing, would we? It's also what's kept wars at bay, because we go and cross borders and go, those dudes aren't that bad. You told me they were horrible and murderers, but I had a beer with them and they were freaking funny. So I love migration. Let's bring it on. But we need it essentially in Australia because we're economically lazy. And so the immigration keeps our economy strong and profitable. And that's why we've had 20 odd years without a recession, because we've had 20 odd years of above world average migration of above average financial ability migrants. That's the secret, and it will always remain that way. 116,000 more in New South Wales, 114,000, and you can see finally WA picking up as predicted last year, and that will continue that trend. Finally Queensland picking up, and that will continue that trend. People will be selling up out of Sydney and heading up north. They'll be coming to WA for those jobs. That's what's going to drive those markets. The other markets are too expensive, can't afford it, go have a better lifestyle. Mark my words. Speaking of lifestyle, Melbourne is no longer number one. Vienna. See, I went to Vienna. I told you it was fabulous. You know, I've booked to go to Copenhagen next year, so expect that to move up the rankings too. But Japan, what's that all about? They've kicked Perth out of it. There's no way. I've been to Tokyo. There's no way Tokyo is better than Perth. I'm doing an official complaint here. This is not right. But for the first time, it's been shuffled, so I couldn't even find all the old stats. They want to charge me $6,000 for those stats. Can you believe it? I'd have had to charge you to come along, and then none of you would have turned up. But you can see, there you go, Vienna now number one. Why? Very simply, the difference between top, second, third, fourth, fifth to the top 15, 20 is microscopic. Believe you me, the drive of that guy going through the Melbourne streets and knocking people off on the pavement, killing a couple, that's what knocked Melbourne off the perch. In the same way, that's why Sydney went from 7 to 11 and now is back in 5. And I kid you not, this is the truth. And this is one of the reasons why places like Copenhagen, etc. have moved up. Security is now so tight on the scale and so well monitored that it's one of the key livability factors. And that 0.1, 0.2 adjustment saying, oh, it's not quite as safe as it used to be, makes a difference. Still highly livable, but expect Melbourne to sneak back up there sometime soon as things normalise. One freak act, like in Sydney, the Lindt Cafe, took it from 7 to 11. It took 3 years for them to say, that won't happen again, back at number 5. Expect Melbourne to follow suit. But again, it's lost its advertising banner. And that's a big thing, because you can't claim to be number one if you're not. That's why we're very lucky at SMATS. We are number one. We are the biggest property tax company in the world. We can say that because we are. And we ain't going to ever be number 2, I can tell you that much. That'll never let that happen. But interesting, we've seen a shuffle. In terms of global property markets, they're all pretty stable. Hong Kong had another good year, ridiculously so. But it's now winds are changing up there, 5.2. Again, you've got to remember, people invest in property to make money. If the expectation of making money disappears, they stop investing, they find the next market. Hong Kong's right at a peak, and you can sell out, cash out, US dollar equivalent, and go anywhere in the world and get next opportunity discounted. And there's Australia is now minus 0.7 on the year, as you'll see, largely on the back of Sydney cooling off, because it's the biggest market that dominates the weighted average. Minus 0.6 all in 1 quarter. So it finally happened, and always remember, you heard it here first, okay? If you look at the property market, our market is running absolutely true to form. So we're still warning against small apartments in Sydney and Melbourne in particular, and anywhere in Australia. So don't buy stops, small, tall and overpriced. But Sydney is now definitely in the soft market. But again, you wouldn't be upset if you'd bought in the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. You'd be overjoyed, which you'll see. Perth is definitely going places. Brisbane already has. Melbourne is still enjoying its time. It's got a little bit more growth because of that population. In Adelaide, I just leave it there every year because it just doesn't do much. Tassie has been tearing up the charts though. That's been going like a crazy person. Let's have a look. There's Tassie, 15% last year on the back of 12 the year before. Who'd have thought that that $100,000 house would have gone to 115? Amazing. But again, that's really because of jobs. Governments sent down services down there. They're running call centres, etc. But Sydney, minus 3.9, 4 consecutive quarters of decline. As we predicted. Took a bit longer than we thought because the population growth was still so strong. But again, if you just had 6, 15, 18, 4 and 14, you have no right to complain at minus 4. Your property's basically gone from 1 million to 2 and you're whinging that it's now 1.9. But let me tell you, that noise in Australia is so loud, it's deafening. Oh, I've lost money on the market. Oh. Get over it, people. Look at what you've made, not what you've lost. If you entered the market in the last 12 months, more fool you for being greedy, thinking it would keep going. If you'd come here, you'd have been wiser. But what it does mean is that opportunity is now returning back because you might be able to negotiate a bit better value. So if you've been looking at Sydney, it's now worth doing it because when it's fallen for, the likelihood is you can go to a seller and say, hey, did you hear it fell for already? And it's likely to fall another 4. So why don't you sell me your property at a bigger discount than you're asking and I'll take it off your hands. That's what they do. They get scared. And that's when you want to buy, when people are scared. Not when they're telling you, oh, it's going up 15% next year, you need to give me an extra 10. That ain't a good time. So it's not a bad thing. If you've been waiting to buy, you're still going to pay a ridiculously horrific price. But it'll be less horrific than it was 12 months or so ago. You can see there's Melbourne. It's only done 2.3, but it's still positive, but it has had 2 consecutive negative quarters. The main reason for that is it's caught Sydney's cold, the media cold. The media in Australia is so negative, it's not funny. Ironically, they're the same media that was so positive, it was ridiculous. But if you see in the paper, the sky is falling, you stay inside. You don't go out and say, no, not yet, just in case it does. So they're just holding back to see what happens. But again, they're not realising that 143,000 people just rocked up into Victoria. And they're out looking for somewhere that they need to live in. Not want to invest, need to live in. We don't have tent camps in Australia. I don't know if you noticed that. When you drive to the city, you don't see anyone in a row of caravans on the side of the road, in tents, in little tin shacks. No, everyone's in a house. So when they turn up, they're going to go buy something. When you've got 140,000 people doing it, they're going to find it. So if you're not buying it, they are. That's what you've got to be careful of. Everywhere else is starting to go, and even Perth is still just working itself out. But to me, again, I love that because the seller's still confused. I thought it was going up. It hasn't gone up. I'm not sure whether it will. Should I sell it to you now? Should I get out? I don't know what to do. Take advantage. Bang. Too late, mate. You sold it to me. Oh, the market changed. Not my problem. Not my problem, yours. But it's all pretty good. I don't know if I'd go to Hobart, but it's obviously tempting. Graph that Greg put up as well. And you can see the sentiment is changing. But this is a cycle. And you can see the Perth being the blue line, it disconnected from the rest of Australia because of population. This just highlights the importance of population. All the markets were roughly all aligned until Perth started losing traction on its population growth. And that I've put up there not to just highlight that Perth is opportunity, but it just shows the importance of population. Now, you can see you've had prolonged upswing in those Sydney, Melbourne markets, But we've run out of steam. It's now too expensive. I'm too nervous. I'm scared. I can't get the loan. I'm not willing. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm confused. And that's why you get the calming and the slowdown. It's a natural thing. It's a cycle. And you can see here's the fact. Sydney still is at 2.5% vacancy. It was 1.8, so it has gone up. What that's telling you is that a lot of suppliers come into the market, which is also making it that people are able to slow down. The difference is it's stuff that they don't want. So there's lots of apartments that aren't really what I was after to live in long term as an owner, but I'm willing to live in for the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months or 2 years, smaller than I wanted, not quite the location, until I gain the confidence or the deposit to buy my own place. So the supply lets me pause. I've got somewhere to live, rent, own, whatever. I'll pause and wait and see what happens. But the supply is stronger than that strong population growth, and hence why the vacancy is lifted. In Melbourne, it's still contracting, and you see Perth, again, this is how you know that Perth is turning. Its vacancy contracted 2.6% in a year. That's a lot. That's a heck of a lot. And that's showing that turnaround in population. But Sydney, for the first time, is starting to decrease its rental because there's now supply in the market. People can be choosy. I'm not going to pay that top price. And hence why you need an expert property manager like David over here who can look after your property in Sydney if you need it, or our team in Melbourne or our team in Perth, because renters will hold the upper hand soon and you need a quality property manager. But it's still nice and balanced. 1.9 in Melbourne is very, very tight, market. 2.2 in Brisbane, come off 0.6. 4.7 in Perth is still high, but rapidly decelerating. That's what you want. That's safety in the market. That comes back to reality. And you see Sydney has stepped back in line. Oh, I've missed that thing. It went down 3%, but you might recall I put up the average value. Last year, Sydney was a premium in the market of 55%. And I said to you, that's way too far. It has to come back. And sure enough, that negative growth has brought it back to 49% premium. And that's still too high. So what that's saying is there's no real capacity to grow too much. It needs to come back a bit. Melbourne's shifted up to 9, and the other ones are going to start contracting. So what you're going to see is the average price across Australia will start rising as the other states get momentum, but Sydney will hold for a while. It needs to. It's just outpriced. But there's still activity because there's still strong population growth. And again, look, 5 years at 10.62% per year. Don't come and complain, please. It's not polite. It's not polite. 8% in Melbourne, that's fabulous. But those underperforming markets like Perth will kick back in. Those averages come back through performance. That's nothing surer. Finishing off, where we're at those crossroads. It's so confusing in the modern world. I now know what it must have been like for my great-great-grandfather as he was going down the road on his horse and buggy, plodded along, clickety-clock, 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 and some idiot went past in a thing called a motor vehicle. That's what I feel like now. Because dudes are using apps that just race along. People are accelerating and doing things that just happen magically. I'm not sure. I think I'm like my great-grandfather. I'm thinking, that'll never work. That car thing, no one will ever want one of those. But geez, we have to embrace it. You can stay there with your horse and cart, going out every morning, feeding it oats, picking up the shit, doing all those things. Or you can just buy a car and you'll be back from the shops in no time. And when it rains, you'll be undercover. And it's even got now automatic windows. I remember when automatic windows came in. Do you remember what a revelation that was? God, I used to hate winding. But it's time to figure all that out. But the one thing I can tell you at this Crossroads, it's all on you. Don't expect anyone else to do the heavy lifting. The government ain't going to help you out. They're wanting to give you less and less and less because you are the little bit better off than the average. They're going to take off you and give to somebody else. You ain't going to be it. So don't expect anyone else to look after you. And these things called children, I don't know if you have any of these things. I know that Asian way is that the children will send them to study, then they can pay us later. Good luck with that. That ain't going to happen. That was what your parents got you to do. It ain't going to happen in your generation, I can tell you that much. And ask my Western colleagues. Our kids are still taking from our grave. It's incredible. So look after yourself. That's the most important thing. If you want something nice to live in somewhere nice, hurry up, because there's less and less good stuff available and there's more and more people buying it that will never ever sell it. So if you want to buy it later, you better bring a big fat checkbook. Otherwise you will not have the front row, you'll be at the back row where the sound is not so good and the visibility is pretty awful. Buy it now. This is the time where Australia is just starting to take off. You know, these new kids are amazing. They're smarter than us, they're wiser than us, they're more manipulative than us. They can get whatever they want. I love when when people come to my office and they say, oh, my kids are about to go to university, they haven't worked out where they're going yet. And I go, pardon? Yeah, they're not sure if it's London or New York or Melbourne or Sydney. I said, not sure. What the heck are you giving them a choice for? You know, you're paying for it. My secret weapon is get 2 envelopes. When your child has 2 options, get 2 envelopes. Where you can afford to send them and where you need to send them, write that university in both envelopes. Then go to your child and say, you can't decide, let's let fate do it. Pick an envelope, whichever one you pick, that's where we're sending you. And then burn the second envelope as soon as they grab the first. We never had choice. It was a miracle we got to university. But this generation, they make us feel guilty if we don't do it. They are very clever. I have great appreciation. But we have to start thinking like them because they're going to get it from us. I guarantee you that the world is going to continue to disappoint you at a political level. There will be no great inspiration. Obama was the last hope. We brought him in and then they treated him like horrible. Didn't let him do what he wanted to do. Blamed him for the goodness that he created. That was the last chance of any ounce of dignity on the planet. And look what we got next. That's how we've set it up to be. So don't get uptight. You'll just give yourself a heart attack or an ulcer. Just realise that that's the new age. The machine can't be turned around. It's too big. The money's too big. The power is too big. Those corporations, look how many billions they've got in the bank. How is a small business going to compete against an entity that has billions in the bank? The political savvy to protect the individual is gone because they're paying billions of dollars in tax. So if you think the government will protect your little business or your little company when it's paying 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 of tax against the might of Microsoft that paid $19 billion in tax last year, you're kidding yourself. But you can continue to do that if you wish. But don't be frustrated about it. It's just the reality. Again, look after yourself, you'll be fine. But the great thing about Australia is, as bad as we are, 4 prime ministers in a row that have been tossed by their own people, we still look fabulous against the rest. How's that? That's just crazy. Doesn't make sense that you can be so bad but still be looking pretty good. It's like I was going out on a date and I went to the Good Sammy's and bought the worst shirt that I could, but everyone else turned up in worse. So I still look pretty flash. That's the world now. It's just crazy. The bar is way too low. What is the reality is that everywhere in the world, the only thing we care about is our children and giving them a better life than we had. And it is our Achilles heel. It's what lets them exploit us, it's what lets them take advantage of us, and we don't need to do it. But people will move heaven and earth to give their children that better opportunity. And that's why Australia wins. Because there is no safer place, no better place, no nicer place, no more relaxed place, no more tolerant place. And that's why they want to go there. And when you look at the value of lifestyle, schooling provided, health provided, luxury house for a fraction of everywhere else, it wins. It wins strong. And let me tell you, this is not the end of Australia's great period. This is absolutely the beginning of it. This is the moment when you could buy a house in Chinatown for around about $300,000 that's now worth 3-4 million, and at one stage was 6. You know, this is the start of it all, because we're just figuring it out. Like I said, it's the first time in Australia's history that real wealth has been created in a city, Sydney. That's why they're all freaking out that the price has gone back just a little bit, because they love that game. The money-making game. That was awesome. Why did it end? Greed, going too fast too soon. And they'll learn from that lesson. And next time, see what happens. Because there'll be more people with more money to push the ball further down the road. So this is that moment. But please, don't make their mistake. Don't make the mistake of the state governments in Australia that got greedy and saw the volume of activity and said, let's rack up the fees and make a fortune, thinking they were going to triple their revenue, and they quartered it. If greed is your motivator for anything, you're going in the wrong direction. It's the last reason to do anything, you know, so don't do it for the money motivation. Do it because it's smart. Do it because it's sensible. Do it because it's great quality property, great quality company shares, great quality something. And do it because the value was there and you felt comfortable with it. Australia in all directions offers that. Some better than others right now. But as a country, as crazy as we are, we're still the most crazy in the lunatic asylum right now. And we've got great future, great opportunity, and an abundance of everything. That means no matter how badly we do things, we still end up looking good. So on that note, I think Australia's at a good crossroad. I hope you choose your right path. Thanks very much for coming along. Really appreciate that.